Welcome to another installment on the Mariner Biology YouTube channel. We have already looked at how a cell membrane is built and how that allows it to do what it's going to do. Now we can define what makes a cell membrane choosy and look more closely at the way different things move across the cell membrane. So what we're going to be dealing with are selectively permeable membranes, the idea of that, and different kinds of passive transport. First, we're going to figure out what the term selectively permeable means and how it applies to a cell membrane. That's what we mean by choosy. And then we're going to look at different passive transport mechanisms. Passive transport means that the cell doesn't need to use any additional energy to move things across the membrane. Whatever energy is already there is what's going to actually cause the molecules to move. So let's draw out the cell membrane. Again, this is our phospholipid bilayer, and it's got some proteins embedded in it. And recall that there are many kinds of proteins that make up the cell membrane, each with a specific function. So what do you think the function of the proteins are that you see drawn here? Now let's draw two molecules, molecule A and molecule B. And we are looking at two different molecules. One will be able to pass through the membrane and another won't. Let's see which one does. So molecule A does move through, but molecule B cannot. It's unable to pass through the membrane. Because molecule A can get through the membrane, we say that the cell membrane is permeable to molecule A. We could also say that the cell membrane is selectively permeable for molecule A. So let's write that out. And then we'll go ahead and move on to passive transport. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an idea of what selectively permeable membranes means. And now we can move on to slide 2. We're going to draw out that membrane again. And we're going to draw it with the two, we've got the phospholipid bilayer and the two transport proteins. So we're going to talk about the first kind of passive transport. Remember that passive transport is one that doesn't require additional energy, just the energy of molecular motion. And so the kind of passive transport we're going to talk about right now is called diffusion. So go ahead and write that out. Okay, so to understand diffusion, or any other kind of passive transport, and active transport for that matter, but we'll get to that later, we need to understand this idea of a concentration gradient. So if you look at both sides of the cell membrane, sometimes you might have more molecules on one side versus another. This means that you have a higher concentration on the side with more molecules. So if we continue to draw, now we have to look at the outside of the cell and the inside of the cell. So we're on either side of the cell membrane, and we know which is which. And you should be able to tell that there are more molecules, more of the solute molecules outside than there are inside. And this creates what we call a concentration gradient. We know that molecules will move from where there's more of them, a higher concentration, because there's going to be more molecules bumping into each other and they're going to move around more, to where there's less of them, or a lower concentration. Now, in addition to the direction the molecules will move, we also need to think about the way they get across the cell membrane. Will they go straight across the lipid bilayer, or will they need the help of those transport proteins? If they are small, nonpolar molecules, they will move straight through the lipid bilayer. It turns out that's what we have here. Okay, so let's just get our concentrations down, and we'll label those molecules as small nonpolar molecules. Okay, and we know that we have a higher concentration outside than we do inside, and we know that we have small nonpolar molecules, so the molecules should move across the lipid bilayer from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, and we can see from the green arrows that that's what happens. So we'll just draw out that idea. So those green arrows are showing the direction of diffusion. And again, the molecules are diffusing down their concentration gradient from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. Okay, so now we got to draw out the membrane again. And we're going to be considering a second kind of passive transport. And this one is called facilitated diffusion. Excuse me. Alright, so again, it's passive transport, no additional energy required, and we're talking about facilitated diffusion. So we can draw everything out as we did before, but this time there's going to be a few changes that we need to think about. So let's draw most of it out. Okay, so there's our concentration gradients, and there's our solute molecules. We've got two sides of the cell membrane. We've got an increased concentration of solute outside and a lower concentration of solute inside. Alright, now here come the changes. One change comes with the kind of molecule that we are following across the membrane. We now have these large polar molecules. Remember before it was small nonpolar molecules. So we know that these can't move through the lipid bilayer, so what's up? It's not going to happen. Okay? I think you know what's up. We need the help of the transport proteins. Molecules are still moving down their concentration gradient, but this time they're doing it through the transport proteins and not through the lipid bilayer. This is known as facilitated diffusion, and we know facilitated means helped. The transport proteins are helping the molecules get across the cell membrane. So let's draw out this idea. And this just lets you know what the orange arrows are showing. Still going down their concentration gradient, so it's still considered diffusion, but this time we're just doing it with the help of the membranes. I'm sorry, the membrane proteins, excuse me. Okay. So we're going to draw out the membrane one more time, and the last kind of passive transport we're going to consider is osmosis. Here we're not considering the movement of solute molecules, we're thinking about the movement of water across the membrane and how that happens. So while we're thinking about this, it's kind of helpful if you think that, or if you understand that the molecules, the solute molecules, are not going to be able to move across the membrane. They're locked on either side in the concentration we see here. So just make sure you're clear about where you have a higher and lower concentration of solute molecules. Now there are three terms that we need to think about to understand how water is going to move across a membrane. These are terms used to describe solutions on either side of a selectively permeable membrane. So the side of the membrane with a lower concentration of solute is referred to as hypotonic. The side of the membrane with a higher concentration of solute is described as hypertonic. Okay. One thing I'm not going to write out for you is the term isotonic. If we had an equal number of solute molecules on both sides of the membrane, we would say these two solutions are isotonic to each other. Doesn't mean things stop moving, doesn't mean water stops moving, it just means that it's moving equally in both directions. So now we need to decide where we have more water. Wherever we have a higher concentration of solute, we will have less water. There's just not as much room for water in that area. The opposite is true when we have a lower concentration of solute. We'll have more water because there's more room for water. Osmosis, this kind of passive transport we're talking about right now, is the movement of water from where there's more of it to where there's less of it. So which way should water move? So we have more water outside than we do inside because there's more solute inside. Okay, and we can see that water is going to go to where there's less of it. Water moves from outside the cell where it's hypotonic through the transport proteins to the inside of the cell where it is more hypertonic, where there's more solute and less water. Remember why we need transport proteins for water, because water's polar and it doesn't move through the hydrophobic tails of the lipid bilayer. I just wanted to throw that in there. So let's write out this idea. And I hope that after watching this, in addition to reading your textbook and thinking about the activities we've done in class, you should have a better understanding of what selectively permeable means and the different kinds of passive transport mechanisms we see moving molecules across a membrane. Thanks very much.